I only needed shelter, but this shelf sounded like something was hidden beneath it.
She was 18 and orphaned. No room, no family, no tools, just one rubber bulb and $11 she had saved by skipping meals and counting every coin twice. And with that $11, she bought a sealed glass eyedropper calibration room outside Corning, Steuben County, New York. Forgotten since 1978, the north sill had split beneath the wall. 3 roof panes sagged under rusted wire. The county closed it on March 14, 1996, with demolition planned for the coming spring. But beneath the calibration shelf waited a locked rubber bulb box, unopened for nearly 50 years, holding papers and money that would change the shape of her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Mina Clarke had been measuring her whole life without knowing it. As a child, she measured flour by the blue line inside a chipped cup, winter by how long frost stayed on the kitchen window, and safety by the sound of her mother's key in the lock. Her mother, Ruth, kept one narrow wooden case wrapped in a gray towel. Inside were 6 glass droppers, 2 polishing rods, a brass gauge, and a paper packet of black rubber bulbs. Ruth cleaned and calibrated droppers for rural nurses who could not afford replacements. At the table after supper, she taught Mina to hold each tube against lamplight and turn it slowly, watching for a cloudy seam or a tip drawn too thin. "Medicine begins before the bottle," she would say. "It begins with an honest drop." On Saturdays, they took the bus to see Amos Bell, a retired scientific glassworker who lived above a shuttered pharmacy near the Chemung River. He had one milky eye, a tobacco-brown apron, and fingers that trembled until they touched glass. Then they became exact. He set a kettle on the stove, lined 3 droppers across a folded flour sack, and made Mina count 20 drops into a graduated cylinder without hurrying. If the volume ran high, she warmed the tip over an alcohol flame and rolled it between graphite paddles. If it ran low, she polished the opening with powdered cerium on a leather strip. At noon, Amos made her explain each mistake before correcting it. He never praised speed. He praised repeatability. "Care is what remains when nobody is watching," Amos told her. Mina understood that accuracy was a promise made to someone who might never know her name. He died in late October, during a rain that stripped the last leaves from the river maples. His landlord emptied the rooms before Ruth could reach them. The graphite paddles, flame lamp, gauges, ledgers, and wooden racks went to an estate dealer in Elmira. Ruth came home carrying only Amos's apron button and a small rubber bulb he had once given Mina for steady work. 3 years later, Ruth died of pneumonia after refusing a second hospital visit she could not pay for. Mina went to live with Elise Trent, a cousin who kept her rooms warm and her voice cool. Elise labeled pantry shelves, counted bath towels, and opened Mina's mail before setting it beside her plate. She spoke of gratitude as if it were rent. The medical glass case stayed under Mina's bed until one February afternoon when Mina returned from school and found a clean rectangle in the dust. Elise had sold it. On April 7th, the day after Mina turned 18, Elise placed Mina's coat on the hall chair with the pockets folded outward. Beside it lay a bus timetable, the rubber bulb Amos had given her, and $11 in small bills. Mina looked toward the kitchen. Her mother's photograph had been turned face down on the mantel. "You're grown now. Find somewhere else to stay." 8 words. Elise did not raise her voice. She lifted the photograph, slid it into a drawer, and closed the drawer with one finger. Mina waited for some correction, some mention of Ruth's tools, some admission that anything had been kept for her. None came. The silence was the final sale. For 6 weeks, she moved west and south in small increments, guarding the $11 as if it were a pilot flame. In Binghamton, she slept 2 nights in the bus terminal until a guard told her the benches were not beds. In Elmira, she took shelter beneath the loading awning of a closed furniture store and woke with rain collected in one shoe. She spent 75 cents on oatmeal, then 50 on a bruised pear and a hard roll. Near Horseheads, a church custodian let her sleep in the furnace room after she helped stack folding chairs. Her money fell to $8.20, then $6.45, then $4.10. She washed in library restrooms, dried her socks on warm radiator pipes, and kept the rubber bulb in her coat pocket, squeezing it whenever fear made her breathing shallow. At the Corning Public Library, she chose a table beneath a vent that blew steady heat. The local weekly lay open beside a rack of tax notices. Mina read the employment columns first, then rooms for rent, then county property disposals printed in type, so small the letters seemed ashamed. One line stopped her. Sealed calibration room, old medical glass annex, $11 plus deed fee. Buyer assumes all risk. She read it 4 times. The deed fee had been waived for abandoned industrial parcels under a county program ending that month. The address sat beyond the city bus route, near old glassworks land east of town. Mina copied it onto the back of the timetable, then placed her remaining bills beside the words. $11 was everything she had started with, and through small kindnesses and careful hunger, almost exactly what remained. By closing time, snow had begun ticking against the library windows. Mina put on her damp coat, slipped the rubber bulb into the inner pocket, and walked toward the county building before she could become sensible. The room had already been waiting longer than she had been alive. The county offices opened at 8:30, and Mina reached the stone steps while the custodian was still salting them. She had crossed nearly 7 miles since leaving the library, following Denison Parkway east until sidewalks thinned into plowed shoulders and dark fields. The previous night, she had slept inside a hay barn behind an abandoned dairy lot, burrowing between square bales while the temperature fell to 19 degrees. Dust worked into her sleeves and throat. At dawn, she brushed straw from her hair, ate half a heel of bread given to her by the church custodian, and walked back toward Corning with her toes numb inside wet shoes. The city was waking behind steamed windows. She passed Sorge's restaurant, with chairs still upside down on the tables, a florist called Market Street Blooms, Farrell's Hardware beneath its green awning, the Palace Theater, with yesterday's showtimes posted behind glass, and a narrow cafe named Doris's Cup, where a woman in a white apron carried a chalkboard onto the pavement. Mina did not stop. $11 rested flat inside her sock, beneath the arch of her foot. Inside the county building, radiators clanged along a corridor that smelled of wet wool and floor wax. A directory pointed her upstairs to property disposition. The office held 3 gray desks, a wall map, and a wooden rail polished by decades of waiting hands. Behind the far desk sat a woman with silver hair cut bluntly at her jaw. She wore a dark green cardigan fastened by one missing button and wrote without looking up. The brass nameplate read, Mrs. Helen Voss, Deputy Clerk. "I came about the calibration room," Mina said. Mrs. Voss stopped writing. Her gaze moved from Mina's damp coat to her reddened hands, then to the folded advertisement she placed on the desk. "You understand the building has no legal occupancy permit?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the well has not been tested?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the county will not repair the roof, walls, road, or electrical service?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you understand that once the deed is recorded, every hazard becomes yours?" Mina pressed her thumb against the rubber bulb in her pocket. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Voss opened a drawer and removed a file tied with cotton tape. Inside were photographs of a low brick structure, half covered by vines, inspection reports, and a deed printed on thick cream paper. She asked for identification. Mina offered her school card and birth certificate, both softened at the folds from 6 weeks in her coat lining. "The price is $11, Mrs. Voss said. "No deed fee under the abandoned worksite provision." Mina sat to remove her shoe. She laid the bills on the desk, smoothing each one with the side of her palm. Mrs. Voss did not smile, though her hand paused over the money. The deed required 4 signatures. Mina wrote slowly, keeping the letters even despite the stiffness in her fingers. Mrs. Voss turned to a black press at the corner of the desk. She placed the document beneath its brass plate and pulled the long handle. The stamp descended with a soft mechanical thud, leaving the county seal pressed deep into the paper. "You will follow East Corning Road to Goff Road," she said. "At the split, take the unmarked gravel lane beside the old pump house. The building is about 3/4 of a mile in. If you reach the rail spur, you have gone too far." She slid the deed forward, then held it by one corner. "Clarke?" she said. Mina looked up. Mrs. Voss opened the file again and removed a yellowed index card. Written across the top were the words "Calibration Annex, Bell Contract, 1962-1978. Did you know Amos Bell? He taught my mother. Then he taught me." The clerk leaned back. The cardigan's loose side opened slightly where the button was missing. "Mr. Bell came here every January to renew a temporary operating certificate. He brought his measurements written in pencil because he said ink encouraged people to pretend mistakes were permanent." Mina could see him at his kitchen table, tapping the eraser against a row of figures before entering the final number. Mrs. Voss turned the index card over. On the back, beneath several inspection dates, someone had written, "Ruth Clarke, cleaning, tip finishing, drop tests." My mother worked there. For a time, it appears. Mrs. Voss studied Mina more carefully. "Mr. Bell told us the room belonged to the craft, not to any company. When the Glassworks Annex closed, he paid the tax himself until he could not. Elise said there was no inheritance. I cannot speak to that." Mrs. Voss placed the index card inside the deed. "But your surname was already in this room before you walked through the door." The sentence did not comfort Mina. It gave weight to the paper. Mrs. Voss folded the deed into a Brown County envelope and wrote the parcel number across the flap. Before handing it over, she selected one of Mina's crumpled dollar bills, pressed it flat beneath a glass paperweight, and put $10 in the cash drawer. "The recorded consideration must remain on file," she said. "This one will do." Mina tucked the envelope under her coat and left before the warmth of the office persuaded her body to sit down. By late morning, the snow had thinned to dry grains moving sideways over the road. East Corning Road ran between small houses, vacant workshops, and fields edged with sumac. At Goff Road, she passed a man repairing a split mailbox with copper wire. He wore a blue cap and held the nails between his lips. A black and white hound stood beside him, one forepaw lifted from the salt. "You headed to Bell's room?" the man asked. Mina nodded. "Name's Arthur Wynne. Dog's Patch." He pointed with his hammer. "Keep left past the walnuts. Right track floods." Patch followed her 20 yards, sniffed the air around her coat, then returned when Arthur whistled once. The gravel lane had nearly vanished beneath frozen grass. Walnut trees leaned over it in 2 irregular rows, their black branches clicking together above her. Beyond them stood the calibration room. It was smaller than the county photographs had made it seem, perhaps 32 feet long and 18 wide, built of pale fire brick, darkened by rain. A shallow roof of wired glass sloped toward the north, where 3 panels bowed inward beneath rusted frames. The brick chimney rose only a few feet above the rear wall and had lost its cap. Over the front door hung a narrow enamel sign, cracked through the center, but still readable: Bell Medical Glass, Drop calibration. Mina walked around the building once before touching it. The north sill had opened in a jagged line beneath the wall, wide enough in places to admit 2 fingers. One gutter rested on the ground. The windows were clouded from within, and something small had nested behind the broken vent grill. The county key resisted, then turned. The door opened 3 inches before striking fallen plaster. Mina leaned her shoulder into it. Dust rose in a pale sheet, dry and medicinal, carrying the odors of cold brick, mouse droppings, rubber, and long stilled ash. The front room held a desk, 2 metal chairs, and wooden shelves bowed under empty cardboard cartons. Frost feathered the inside of the windows. When Mina brushed one shelf, grit rasped beneath her glove, and a brown bottle rolled from the darkness, tapping the floor without breaking. Somewhere behind the wall, water made one patient drop into metal. She crossed to the back room. Here, the wired roof admitted a weak, greenish light. A long calibration shelf ran beneath it, fitted with iron stands where glass droppers had once hung in rows. Graduated cylinders stood cloudy in a cabinet. A cracked drip tray occupied the center bench, and dosage lines remained painted on a black comparison board. Thin white marks spaced with mathematical care. On the lowest shelf sat several wooden boxes filled with hardened rubber bulbs. Each one collapsed inward like a small, exhausted lung. Mina lifted one. It crumbled against her palm. Beneath the main shelf, bolted to the brick, was a longer box made of dark wood and fitted with a square iron lock. Its lid bore the faint circular stains of rubber bulbs arranged there year after year. Mina tried the county key, though she knew it would not fit. The lock did not move. By dusk, cold had settled through the soles of her shoes. She cleared plaster from a space near the front room radiator, though the radiator itself was dead. From a drawer, she found a canvas floor cloth, stiff with age, and shook it outside. The cloth smelled of dust and old paraffin, but it kept her coat from touching the concrete. Her supper was the remaining bread, softened with water from a bottle Arthur Wynne had filled at his kitchen pump. She ate slowly, listening as the building changed temperature. Glass clicked above her. The chimney gave a hollow breath. The drip in the back room continued at intervals too wide to count. Before sleeping, Mina placed the deed inside her shirt and set Amos Bell's rubber bulb beneath her cheek, where another person might have kept a photograph. An honest drop could protect a life. On the first morning, Mina woke before daylight because something had crossed the metal drip tray in the back room. She found no animal, only a trail of mouse prints through the dust, and one black walnut resting beneath the bench. Outside, she followed a buried pipe to a hand pump 30 yards beyond the chimney. The handle groaned, and the first water came brown with rust. She worked it for 12 minutes until the stream cleared enough to fill a jar. An outhouse leaned near the far walnut row, its door tied shut with clothesline. By noon she had learned which floorboard warned beneath her left heel, which roof pane rattled before the wind rose, and which groan belonged to cooling iron rather than failing brick. The second day, she swept paths between the rooms and carried broken plaster outside in an empty dosage carton. The third morning, after cold rain froze across the lane, she walked into Corning for supplies. Farrell's hardware smelled of pine handles, kerosene, and the iron dust produced by a key-cutting wheel. Brass drawer pulls filled one wall in labeled bins. Behind the counter stood a broad man whose left eyebrow was divided by a white scar. He watched Mina place $3.35 beside a chimney brush, a coil of rope, and a packet of stove cement. "That building needs more than this," he said. "It needs one thing at a time." He turned the chimney brush in his hand. "You own Bell's calibration room?" "The county says I do." "My name is Elias Farrell." He looked toward her shoes, still edged with frozen mud. "You have heat?" "Not yet." He pulled a thin book from beneath the counter. Its cover read, "Repairs for Small Shops and farm buildings. The corners had been reinforced with cloth tape. "Open an account," he said. "Pay when you can. I cannot promise when." "Then promise you'll write down every charge." Mina hesitated before accepting the pencil he offered. In a ruled ledger, Elias entered a 6-inch wire chimney brush at 185 50 feet of quarter-inch rope at 110. Stove cement at 40 cents. A tin flue mirror at 65 cents. And 2 pounds of coarse salt at 18 cents. Beneath them he wrote, "Manual. No charge." Bell paid his accounts, Elias said. Slowly, sometimes. But he paid them. Mina carried the bundle back beneath her coat. The chimney had not held a fire in decades. She began by laying the canvas floor cloth over the hearth and sealing the room's doorway with damp rags. The flue mirror showed a passage narrowed by soot and a fallen nest. From the roof, she lowered the brush on the rope, twisting clockwise so the wire head would not unscrew inside the shaft. It stopped 6 feet down. She marked the rope, pulled the brush free, and bent its outer wires inward. The second attempt broke through with a soft collapse. Creosote fell into the firebox in brittle sheets, black as burned sugar. Mina worked from roof to hearth, then from hearth upward with a shorter rod she found behind the cabinet. Every 40 strokes she stopped to clear the pile and inspect the masonry for loose fragments. The work took 6 hours the first day and 3 more the next morning. Her shoulders burned from holding the rope away from the glass roof. Soot entered the seams of her gloves and darkened the skin around her eyes. When the brush finally passed from top to bottom without resistance, she held a candle beneath the opening. The flame leaned steadily toward the flue. She patched 2 shallow cracks with stove cement, waited until evening, and built a test fire from walnut twigs no thicker than pencils. Smoke climbed instead of spilling into the room. Mina added 3 split pieces from a fallen branch, each one no larger than her wrist. The chimney drew with a low, even sound. She heated water in a laboratory beaker whose markings had survived beneath the grime, then poured it over oats in a dented cup. The meal tasted faintly of smoke and metal. She ate beside the fire with the manual open across her knees. Warmth changed the building's voice. Frost loosened from the window corners. The wooden shelves gave small, settling knocks. In the back room, the iron calibration stands expanded and clicked in sequence, one after another, as if invisible workers were returning to their places. On the 4th day, Mina began the workroom inventory. She found a brass drop-counting stand with 12 empty rings, each ring adjustable by a knurled screw. A mahogany case held 3 graduated cylinders. Their etched measurements faded but legible. Beneath the cloth lay a graphite paddle, worn smooth along one edge. There were 2 boxes of glass tubing, wrapped in newspaper from 1977, a tip polishing wheel with its leather surface hardened, a dosage line jig made from blackened steel, and a narrow balance scale protected beneath a cloudy glass cover. In the cabinet beside the sink rested a clinic ledger, swollen by damp. Most pages had fused at the edges, but the cover bore a stamped title, Winter Nursing Distribution. Mina did not force it open. She placed it near the fire with 2 wood blocks beneath the spine, so air could pass around it. The locked rubber bulb box remained under the main shelf. She cleaned around it before touching the lock again. The box measured 30 inches long, 11 deep, and almost 9 high. 4 iron bolts passed through its base into the shelf supports. It appeared too heavy for empty wood, yet when Mina pressed down on the lid, the right side answered with a faint double knock. She repeated the test. The left side gave 1 flat sound, the right gave 2. Wood, then something beneath it. Mina removed the hardened bulbs stored above the box and arranged them on the bench according to size. Under the last row, she found a circular cedar disc no wider than a teacup saucer. Its grain matched the shelf, but its color was slightly darker. A narrow notch had been cut along one edge and filled with wax. She warmed the wax with the side of her cup, not with flame. When it softened, she worked the tip of Elias's pencil into the notch. The disc lifted 1/16 of an inch. Beneath it lay a recessed brass ring. Mina pulled. A concealed panel rose from the calibration shelf, bringing with it 2 short iron pins. The panel had hidden a cavity behind the locked box rather than inside it. She reached down and felt oiled cloth, cold metal, and the straight edge of paper. She stopped. The fire had fallen low, and afternoon light was leaving the roof panes. Mina added 1 piece of walnut, washed the soot from her hands, and spread the cleanest flour sack she could find across the bench. Only then did she return to the compartment. The first package was wrapped in waxed linen and tied with red thread. Inside lay Amos Bell's graphite paddles, each marked with his initials, and a small alcohol lamp with a brass cap. The second held Ruth's brass drop gauge, 2 polishing rods, a box of fine cerium powder, and the blue-handled file Mina remembered from childhood. A folded gray apron had been placed beneath them. 1 button was missing. Mina touched the empty thread where it had been sewn. The final package was a rectangular tin box, sealed around the lid with black wax. A key had been taped to its underside. It did not fit the iron lock on the rubber bulb box, but it turned in the tin box without resistance. Inside were saving certificates bound in 4 packets, several paper envelopes, and a shallow coin tray. Mina lifted each item separately and wrote it down in the hardware ledger before opening the next. The certificates had been issued through a Corning bank between 1948 and 1976. Their combined value was $42,900. Some bore Amos Bell's name. Others belonged to Ruth Clarke and to people Mina did not recognize. Each had been endorsed into a small preservation trust for the calibration room, though no trustee had ever presented the documents after the building closed. The first envelope contained 21 Morgan silver dollars. The second held 36 Walking Liberty half dollars and 48 Mercury dimes. A paper roll contained Lincoln wheat cents, mostly dark from age. Mina counted the loose coins twice, then a third time, separating them by denomination and date. Beneath the tray lay a tarnished military medal, suspended from a faded ribbon. The face showed a winged figure, and the reverse carried the year 1945 beside the name Thomas Bell. Mina did not polish it. She wrapped it again in its original tissue and placed it beside the lamp. At the bottom of the tin box rested a sealed letter, addressed in dark pencil. For the one who opens the room carefully. The handwriting was familiar. Mina turned the envelope toward the light, though there was not enough left to read by. She could have opened it beside the fire. Instead, she set the certificates back into their packets, returned the coins to their envelopes, and folded the gray apron over everything except the letter. She was not ready for the voice waiting inside it. Outside, freezing rain had stopped. Mina walked beyond the walnut trees to where runoff moved through a drainage channel toward the Chimney River. The water carried broken skins of ice and reflected one pale band of evening sky. She stood there until her fingertips went numb, listening to the current work patiently around stones. It could not move. Behind her, the calibration room held its first fire in nearly 30 years. An honest drop could protect a life. Morning entered through this wired roof in narrow bars of silver. Mina fed 2 walnut splits into the stove, washed her hands, and carried the sealed envelope to the calibration bench. The pencil strokes slanted forward in the same disciplined hand she had seen on Amos Bell's lesson cards. Even the capital R resembled a glass tube bent carefully over flame. She eased a polishing rod beneath the flap so the paper would not tear. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have opened this compartment, then you have already done the first necessary thing. You noticed that the shelf answered differently beneath your hand. That means you did not arrive here merely to take possession. You listened. My name is Amos Nathaniel Bell. I am writing in Corning, New York under the care of Dr. Miriam Cole, who has told me that the weakness in my hands and legs is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. She has been honest about the time remaining. I am trying to be equally honest with you. Our work began with Silas Bell, born in 1861 near Millville, New Jersey, who learned lamp working from bottle men and came to Corning in 1887. His daughter Clara Bell, born in 1882, marked medicine tubes for physicians and kept this room during the influenza winter of 1918. Clara's son Thomas, born in 1905, improved the drop counting stands before serving overseas during the Second World War. I, Amos, his son, was born in 1932 and returned to these benches after losing him in Europe in 1945. 4 generations, and none of us owned the glass once it left our hands. We owned only the care used in making it. The trade closed here on October 31st, 1978. The room has stood silent for more than 30 years because no company believed careful hand calibration could remain profitable beside factory production. They may have been correct about profit. They were not correct about usefulness. If you decide to work here, begin slowly. Warm old glass to no more than 140 degrees Fahrenheit before bringing it near a flame, or hidden strain may split it. For ordinary aqueous medicine, 20 drops should measure 1 milliliter at room temperature, but test every tube rather than trusting the rule. Mix cerium oxide with clean water at roughly 1 part powder to 3 parts water, and polish the tip in 10-second intervals so heat does not gather at the rim. After fitting a new rubber bulb, compress it 20 times and leave it resting overnight before the final volume test. The certificates are not payment for finding this room. They are working years that Ruth Clarke and I set aside in small amounts. Ruth cleaned glass after nursing visits and refused wages when a family had no money. She said the next winter would always bring someone who needed an exact dose. The ledger records where the droppers went. If Ruth's child should ever read this, know that your mother's name belonged here. She worked at the north bench beneath the clearest roof pane. Her hands were quick, but she made herself move slowly. I kept her tools because she asked me to protect them from anyone who might sell the brass and glass separately. I could not protect everything. I am sorry for that failure. Do not confuse inheritance with money. Money can repair a roof and purchase fuel, but it cannot teach the hand when to stop polishing. An inheritance is work kept intact long enough for another person to choose it freely. You owe us no obedience. Sell the certificates, leave the room, or close the door again if that is the honest choice. But if you stay, make each instrument as though a feverish child will depend upon the smallest mark. Behind the back door, beneath the 3rd walnut tree, you will find Thomas's survey marker. It will tell you where the original workshop line began. Light his alcohol lamp once before deciding anything. He believed a flame showed whether a room was ready to breathe. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Amos Nathaniel. Bell, January 12th, 1984. Mina read the letter twice. The second time, she stopped at Ruth's name and placed her thumb beside it without covering a single letter. Then she folded the pages along their original creases, matching each worn edge precisely. She did not press the envelope to her chest or speak into the vacant room. She set it beside the brass gate and stood with both hands flat on the bench until the shaking passed through them. The back door had swollen in its frame. Mina loosened it with the blade of a putty knife and stepped into morning cold. Snow reached the tops of her shoes. She counted the walnut trees from the chimney wall and knelt beneath the 3rd, clearing frozen leaves with the edge of a roof slate. 6 inches below the soil, her fingers struck metal. The marker was a square brass plate fixed to a limestone block. Most of its lettering had gone green, but the center remained legible beneath her sleeve. T. Bell, North Work Line, 1946. A narrow arrow pointed toward the calibration room. Mina followed its direction and saw that the rear shelf, the chimney, and the oldest walnut stood along one deliberate line. She returned carrying a pinch of soil inside the cuff of her coat. Thomas Bell's alcohol lamp sat where she had left it, capped and dry. Mina cleaned the reservoir with warm water, cleared the wick tube using one of Ruth's polishing rods, and filled it with a small measure of denatured alcohol Elias had included among the chimney supplies. She waited until the wick darkened evenly. The match flared against her thumbnail. A low blue flame formed above the brass collar, steady except when wind pressed against the roof. Its light passed through the nearest glass dropper and laid a thin, bright line across the black dosage board. The room did not seem transformed. It seemed occupied. Mina opened the clinic ledger only after the flame had burned for several minutes. Air near the stove had released the first pages from one another. The entries named nurses, farms, and winter roads. Lena Ortiz, who carried 12 calibrated droppers to migrant families near Painted Post. Samuel Pike, the church custodian who had given Mina shelter beside his furnace. Arthur Wynn's mother, listed as receiving infant feeding droppers during the winter of 1963. And Helen Voss, then a young county aide, who had delivered a box to a household quarantined outside Addison. The kindnesses had not begun with Mina. They had moved through hands, rooms, and years, often without returning to the person who first offered them. A bowl of oatmeal, a filled water bottle, a night beside a furnace, credit written in pencil. Small things had carried her farther than certainty ever had. Before this story moves forward, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they did not have to. Perhaps it was a meal, a ride, a place to sit, or a few patient words. Tell us about that person in the comments, if you can. Some names deserve to be spoken again. That evening, Mina wrapped the graphite paddles, brass gauge, metal, and letter in Amos's gray apron. She placed the bundle beside her on the canvas floor cloth, close enough to touch without waking fully. The alcohol lamp remained on the bench, extinguished and cooling, with a faint circle of warmth still held in its brass. The first snow arrived on December 2nd, laying 5 inches across the walnut lane and showing Mina exactly where the roof leaked. Dark circles appeared beneath the wired glass panels before breakfast, and one slow drop struck the calibration shelf beside Ruth's brass gauge. She read the roofing chapter in Elias Farrell's manual 3 times. The roof measured 32 feet by 18, with a shallow northward pitch. After subtracting the glass section and adding 10% for breakage, she calculated 12 bundles of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of roofing felt, and 16 pounds of galvanized nails. The figures frightened her less once they were written down. Elias delivered the materials in an old truck. From beneath the seat, he brought out a roofing hatchet with a leather-wrapped handle. "My brother used this," he said. "He won't need it again." A retired roofer named Walter Haynes came with him. Walter had a white mustache, stained yellow at one corner, and climbed the ladder without asking permission. When Mina mentioned payment, he shook his head. "Teach the next person." For 11 days, they worked beneath skies the color of zinc. Mina removed rotten shingles, sistered a split rafter with sound pine, and stretched a chalk line from eave to ridge. Walter taught her to set each nail with 3 strokes, one to start, one to seat, one to finish. That nail's proud. Mina raised the hatchet. "Pull it." By December 15th, the last ridge shingle lay flat. Snow gathered evenly over the roof instead of disappearing into warm leaks, and the bench beneath Ruth's old place remained dry. January exposed what firelight had concealed. Several chimney bricks had spalled along their outer faces, leaving shallow red shells around soft interiors, and the mortar between them powdered beneath Mina's thumb. Walter showed her how to remove only what had failed. She mixed 2 parts hydraulic lime with 1 part fine sand, then added fire clay at a ratio of 1 part to 4 for the joints nearest the flue. The mixture had to hold on the trowel without sagging, yet remain soft enough to move when the chimney warmed. For 3 weeks, the temperature stayed in the 20s. Mina worked barehanded because gloves dulled her sense of the joint depth. Every 15 minutes, her fingers went numb, and she carried them to the stove, holding them near the iron until they began to ache. She replaced 6 damaged bricks, packed the deeper joints in 2 lifts, and kept the fresh mortar covered with damp burlap so it would cure slowly. On January 29th, Walter stood outside while Mina built the test fire. Smoke rose cleanly from the rebuilt crown. He watched it for a full minute before nodding once. The front room floor was white pine, fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails, whose black heads had nearly vanished beneath grime. Mina lifted only the 2 boards softened by water and replaced them with pine cut from a salvaged church pew Elias kept behind the store, the random orbit sander rented for $14 a day. She made 3 passes, beginning with 80 grit, then 120, and finally 220, vacuuming between each one so loose particles would not carve circles into the wood. Around the rosehead nails, she worked by hand with folded paper and a narrow cork block. The first coat of oil disappeared almost at once. She waited overnight, rubbed the surface lightly, and applied 2 more coats, leaving 48 hours for the final cure. The boards shifted from dark honey toward mahogany, their grain rising in long lines toward the back room. One morning she could not begin. The sander sat unplugged beside the wall, and Mina walked to the marsh beyond the drainage channel. A great blue heron stood ankle-deep in gray water, its body motionless, while wind bent the reeds around it. She watched until afternoon and did no work that day. The following morning, she returned to the floor without punishing herself for the silence. There were 8 windows in all. 3 had no glass, 4 were cracked, and 1 held an original pane dated by its wavy surface and corner marks to 1788. Mina preserved that pane exactly where it was, cleaning it only with warm water and a soft cloth. For the others, she removed the brittle putty with a warmed knife and bedded each replacement pane in DAP 33 glazing putty. She pressed the putty into a smooth bevel that shed water away from the muntins, then set the glazing points far enough apart to hold without stressing the glass. The sash cords had rotted inside the frames. She replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, lowering each counterweight carefully through the pocket and tying a figure 8 knot so the rope would not slip under load. The repaired sashes rose with a soft, balanced resistance. On the final window, Mina paused with the putty knife against the wood. A chickadee had landed on a walnut branch outside, close enough that she could see the black cap above its bright, restless eye. It tilted its head toward the room, gave 1 brief call, and flew across the clean pane without striking it. Mina finished the bevel and closed the sash. The walls had been finished with horsehair plaster, pressed over hand-split oak lath. Near the chimney, heat and old moisture had loosened 3 sections. Mina's first patch dried too quickly and cracked. The second sagged before setting. The third separated from the lath with a hollow sound when she tapped it. Elias found an old paper bag of clean horsehair in the loft above his store. Mina mixed it into lime plaster until the fibers crossed the mortar without clumping. She dampened the oak lath, pressed on a scored scratch coat, and waited until it held beneath her thumb. The brown coat went on 3/8 of an inch thick and cured beneath damp cloth for 72 hours. The final coat, 1/8 of an inch, was worked smooth with a steel trowel. When the surface had dried to the color of warm bone, Mina rested her palm against it. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris began leaving paper bags on the doorstep before sunrise. She was a compact woman with flour permanently caught in the seam of her wedding ring. The bags held bean soup, heel ends from cafe loaves, or 2 boiled eggs wrapped in waxed paper. Mina carried the third bag back to the cafe and placed coins beside the register. Doris pushed them away with a wooden spoon. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." There were no plans for candles, and neither woman corrected the sentence. Caleb Wynne arrived one Saturday on a red Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul tied across the handlebars. He was 15, narrow as a fence rail, and had a cowlick that rose no matter how firmly he flattened it. Without introduction, he began splitting the fallen walnut limbs Mina had dragged beside the shed. When she offered him money, he shook his head and said another round upright. My mother said, "About your grandfather." Amos had not been her grandfather, but Mina understood what the town had chosen to mean. Reverend Boyd walked past each morning at 7:10, wearing a brown overcoat polished pale at the elbows. He never entered unless invited. He tipped his hat toward the repaired roof, the stacked wood, or Mina working at a window. One February morning, he stopped beside the lane and raised 2 fingers. "Keep her hands steady." Then he continued toward town, leaving 4 boot prints dark in the new snow. Mina postponed the cellar until February 11th. The door lay beneath a workbench in the back room. Its hinges resisted until she brushed away the rust and worked them with oil. 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot chamber whose fieldstone floor remained dry despite the winter thaw. At the center rested a dressed granite slab marked with a carved symbol, a drop falling into a shallow cup. The same mark appeared on Amos's oldest calibration cards. Mina cleared dust from its edges but did not attempt to lift it. Some objects required more knowledge than strength. Beneath the 3rd step, something scraped when she swept. A small oak box had been wedged behind the riser. Inside lay a brass key whose bow had been shaped into the same falling drop symbol, and a tintype wrapped in linen. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the calibration room before the walnut trees had thickened. She held a graphite paddle in one hand and looked directly at the camera with Mina's narrow chin and level gaze. On the reverse, scratched into the metal, were the words Clara Bell, daughter of Silas, age 25, summer of 1903. Mina carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel beside Thomas Bell's medal. She did not know what it opened. Snow withdrew from the lane in gray ridges. The drainage creek grew loud with meltwater, and the walnut branches released pale green catkins that trembled above the repaired glass. Mina cleaned the alcohol lamp, restored 1 drop-counting stand, and ordered a small length of borosilicate tubing. She decided not to begin the full craft that spring. The room was sound, but her hands still needed repetition. She would spend 1 silver coin on materials and practice on short samples until every dosage line held true. The remaining certificates and coins went into a fireproof chest beneath the bench. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Mina completed the first instrument she was willing to place in another person's hands. It was a plain glass dropper with a polished tip, a black rubber bulb, and 4 dosage lines set by the restored steel jig. She warmed the tube gradually, shaped the opening between Amos's graphite paddles, and tested it with distilled water held at 70 degrees. 20 drops measured 1 milliliter. She emptied the cylinder, dried it, and repeated the test 6 times. The 7th result matched the first. Mina wrote the date in the clinic ledger and wrapped the dropper in brown paper. It went to a home nurse outside Painted Post, who cared for children during a difficult influenza season. There was no invoice inside the package. The calibration room no longer smelled abandoned. The front floor carried the deep reddish tone of oiled pine. 8 windows admitted winter light without drafts. The repaired chimney drew cleanly, and the white plaster near it showed no cracks. Along the back wall, restored stands held rows of practice tubes. Ruth's brass gauge occupied the north bench beneath the clearest roof pane. The brass key remained on the mantel until a windstorm brought down one of the oldest walnut limbs. While cutting the broken branch, Mina noticed a rectangular outline beneath a shelf of bark near the trunk. A bronze plate had been fitted into the tree and allowed to grow over at the edges. At its center was a keyhole, surrounded by the falling drop mark. The brass key turned once. Inside the hollow was a copper cylinder wrapped in tarred cloth. Mina carried it to the workbench and opened it beneath the lamp. The cylinder contained a folded 48-star American flag and a note written by Clara Bell in November 1918, while her brother Daniel served with the American Expeditionary Forces during the First World War. Clara wrote that the flag had hung in the calibration room while families waited for news from France. Daniel returned with damaged lungs and never again worked near an open flame. Instead, he kept the ledgers and delivered finished droppers through winters when influenza and pneumonia moved from house to house. She asked that the flag be kept not as proof of sacrifice, but as a reminder that useful work continued when celebration had ended. Mina refolded it along the old creases. She placed Clara's note beside Amos's letter and returned the copper cylinder to a dry cabinet, not to the tree. Thomas Bell's medal was taken to Bath National Cemetery on May 8th, the anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. Mina stood beside the grave listed in the military records and laid the wrapped medal beneath a small arrangement of wintergreen. There was no gathering. Walter Haynes drove her, removed his cap, and waited near the road. Of the money hidden in the room, Mina used only 4 coins. 1 paid for the first glass tubing. 1 purchased rubber compound from a medical supplier. 2 were exchanged to repair the original dosage line jig without replacing its hand-cut screws. The savings certificates were transferred into a protected account, whose terms allowed only building maintenance, craft materials, and emergency shelter for the next keeper. The remaining coins returned to the tin box. Mina added a paper label and pencil. For the next one, count twice. The shop reopened without a newspaper notice or painted announcement. Doris pinned an index card to the cafe corkboard, hand-calibrated medicine droppers. Repairs accepted. Ask at Farrell's. The first request came from a retired midwife. The second came from a veterinary clinic. By spring, more than 40 names filled a mailing list kept beside the old winter ledger. Mina completed only what she could test properly. Those who needed speed were directed elsewhere. Caleb returned in June carrying a cedar sign across the handlebars of a larger bicycle. He had carved Bell Medical Glass into the face, copying the letters from the cracked enamel sign. Beneath them, in smaller letters, he had added, "and daughters." Mina ran one finger through the fresh grooves. There were sons too, she said. Caleb shifted his weight. He was taller now, though the cowlick remained. Daughters kept the room. They mounted the sign above the door without discussing it further. Ruth's name, Clara's labor, and Mina's patient tests were not written there, but the added words made space for all 3. That autumn, Mina opened a new ledger. On the first page, she recorded the room temperature, the condition of the roof, the number of finished droppers, and the balance of the preservation account. Then she took a sheet of cream paper and began a letter. "My dear one, whoever you are." She described the north bench and the clearest pane. She explained how to warm old glass, how to mix polishing compound, and why the rubber bulbs must rest overnight. She wrote that mistakes should be entered in pencil, but never hidden. She did not tell the next keeper to remain. Choice was part of the inheritance. Before folding the letter, Mina added the names of Doris, Elias, Walter, Caleb, Reverend Boyd, Helen Voss, Arthur Wynne, and Samuel Pike. She wrote what each had given when no repayment had been certain. The letter went into the tin box beneath the certificates. On winter evenings, light from Thomas Bell's alcohol lamp passed through the completed droppers and left narrow lines across the dosage board. Outside, snow settled over the walnut lane. Inside, Mina counted each fall of water until volume and patience agreed. An honest drop could protect a life. She extinguished the flame, checked the stove latch, and closed the back room door without locking it. The glass eyedropper calibration room waits. It has always waited. In the county office, Helen Voss eventually retired. Her successor kept the old glass paperweight on the corner of the desk. Beneath it remained Mina's wrinkled dollar bill, flattened across the recorded parcel number, while the other $10 rested in the county ledger as proof that the room had once been purchased for 11.